Between the late 60s, early 70s, Mom wanted to leave Dad. Divorce was happening, was not popular back then. So she gave me a paper bag and said, we're moving to Alaska.
If you think you know Sue Aikens, think again. We've all seen her brave through storms and stare down bears on life below zero.
Proud of myself for doing it and overcoming some fears, especially as he was getting closer, but I also protected Cam.
She's the tough, no-nonsense woman who shrugs off danger like it's no big deal. But what if the most dangerous thing she ever faced wasn't the Alaskan wilderness? What if the real threat came from behind the camera and nearly broke her body, her career, and the show itself? Let's find out what really happened to Sue Aikens. The woman the world never knew. On Life Below Zero, Sue Aikens was introduced as a fully formed, blunt, fearless woman who knew what she was doing. She hauled gear alone, dealt with mechanical failures in sub-zero temperatures, and spoke to the cameras with brutal honesty. The show didn't introduce her with dramatic music or a heroic backstory. What you saw was what you got. And that image stuck. Sue became the embodiment of Arctic toughness. She cursed freely, laughed at danger, and treated injuries like inconveniences. While other cast members often framed survival as a family effort or a cultural tradition, Sue stood apart. She was alone with no safety net and no backup crew waiting off camera. To viewers, that solitude translated into strength. She didn't ask for help. She didn't romanticize the cold. And that was the kind of transparency people wanted. Over time, fans built a clear picture of who Sue Aikens was supposed to be. A woman who felt nothing, feared nothing, and needed nothing. Someone forged by Alaska itself. Someone who had chosen isolation because she was simply stronger than the rest of us. But that was never really the full story. The show gave Sue a role to play. She was the unbreakable one who was never supposed to hesitate. And what we never saw was the cost of maintaining that image. Sue was always the one managing logistics, permits, runways, fuel schedules, wildlife deterrence, emergency planning, and constant risk assessment. Much of her day-to-day work wasn't cinematic. It was repetitive, exhausting, and mentally draining. Yet the camera mostly caught the moments where she pushed through pain, brushed off danger, or made survival look effortless. That's where the tension begins. The truth is that there was always so much more to Sue than just her bravery. Long before frozen rivers and grizzly bears, Sue learned her first survival lesson in places far less dramatic. Small apartments, unstable homes, and rooms where no one was coming to help. She was born into instability. Her early childhood was marked by neglect, financial stress, and adults who were either overwhelmed or absent. Food wasn't guaranteed. Attention wasn't guaranteed. Safety wasn't guaranteed. As a toddler, she learned that crying didn't always bring comfort. Sometimes it brought annoyance. Sometimes nothing at all. That kind of environment teaches a child something dangerous and useful at the same time. Self-reliance becomes instinct, not choice. When her mother remarried, the situation worsened. Alcohol, violence, and unpredictability entered her daily life. Sue learned to read moods before words. She learned the warning signs, a change in tone, a shift in posture, the silence before anger. This wasn't toughness. It was pattern recognition under pressure. The same skill that would later help her read animal behavior in the wild was first learned by reading adults who could turn volatile without warning. School offered no refuge. Sue struggled with dyslexia, a condition that was poorly understood at the time. Letters moved. Words refused to stay still. While other children advanced, she fell behind, publicly and painfully. Teachers labeled her slow. Classmates labeled her stupid. Reading aloud became humiliating. Writing her own name felt like a test she was destined to fail. Social isolation followed naturally. Kids can smell differences. Dyslexia, poverty, and emotional withdrawal made Sue an easy target. So she withdrew further. People believed she just wasn't smart enough, so she started looking for other ways to prove her worth. And that came from physical strength. She learned early that survival didn't require spelling. It required problem-solving, awareness, and the ability to keep going when things didn't make sense. One night, her mother woke the family in the early hours and told them they were leaving. By morning, they were on the road, headed north with no real explanation and no sense of permanence. For Sue, this wasn't an adventure. It was another disruption layered onto an already unstable childhood. When her family moved closer to the wilderness, Sue gravitated toward it instinctively. The woods were predictable in a way people weren't. Hunger had rules. The weather had patterns. Animals gave warnings. Unlike adults, nature didn't pretend. She learned direction by the sun, learned what plants could be eaten and which couldn't, learned how to stay calm when lost. None of this was framed as an adventure at the time. It was a regulation, a way to manage anxiety by mastering surroundings. Sue adapted quickly, not because she was fearless, but because she already understood instability. Isolation wasn't new for her, and she had already learned how to rely on herself. While her siblings struggled with the shock of remoteness, Sue recognized the logic of the place. You prepared, or you paid for it later. As a teenager, she was exposed to skills most people don't encounter until adulthood, if ever. In Alaska, learning to fly a small plane wasn't a novelty. It was practical. Roads didn't always exist, and weather erased paths. Air travel was often the safest option. Sue learned early that transportation, logistics, and mechanical awareness were survival tools, not hobbies. Flight training sharpened something important: judgment under pressure. So, flying in Alaska requires constant evaluation of conditions like visibility, wind, fuel, and terrain. You don't rely on optimism, you rely on data. That mindset reinforced what she already practiced instinctively. Assess risk, act deliberately, and don't panic when conditions change. In contrast to classrooms where dyslexia marked her as slow, the wilderness measured competence in outcomes, not explanations. Could you get from point A to point B? Could you fix what broke? Could you keep yourself alive? Alaska only confirmed that Sue was born to do this, to survive. This is where the common narrative goes wrong. Alaska wasn't an escape from society for Sue. Escape implies avoidance. What happened instead was alignment. The environment rewarded the exact traits she had been developing since childhood: vigilance, patience, independence, and emotional containment. Where other people found the isolation crushing, she found it clarifying. By the time Sue reached adulthood, Alaska wasn't a challenge she needed to conquer. It was a system she understood. But she had more challenges waiting for her in the outside world. Sue left Alaska temporarily and returned to Illinois as a young adult because she was trying to build something that Alaska couldn't provide: connection. Working at a diner in Chicago, she met a man older than her, financially stable, and outwardly confident. The relationship moved fast. Within weeks, they were married. On the surface, it looked like she had finally found the security she was looking for. A job, a home, a future that didn't involve constant risk. For someone who had grown up without stability, that promise mattered. But the reality deteriorated quickly, and it wasn't something Sue was expecting. She thought her bad days were finally past her. Her husband drank heavily and became controlling. Her isolation returned, but this time it wasn't geographic. It was interpersonal. He monitored her movements, restricted her access to others, and used intimidation to maintain control. When conflicts escalated, they turned physical. Sue was injured during arguments, including being slammed into a wood stove, leaving permanent scars. This wasn't unfamiliar territory. Sue recognized the patterns from her childhood, and maybe that's why she stayed. What's important is not why she did, though, since that question oversimplifies abuse, but what staying cost her. When she became pregnant, the hope was that the situation might stabilize. Instead, violence escalated. During an argument, she was struck in the abdomen. She went into premature labor shortly afterward. Their daughter was born underweight and required weeks of intensive medical care. The financial pressure compounded the emotional stress. Sue did not report the abuse, not because it wasn't serious, but because leaving felt more dangerous than staying. Then her husband became ill. What began as headaches turned into a terminal diagnosis, an aggressive brain tumor. The dynamic shifted overnight. Sue became his primary caregiver. The abuse stopped since it was replaced by dependency. She administered medication, managed his hygiene, worked overnight shifts to pay medical bills, and handled the logistics of end-of-life care, all while caring for a medically fragile child. For 14 months, she carried that responsibility almost entirely alone. This period is often skipped or condensed in retellings of Sue's life, but it's critical. Caregiving required a different kind of endurance than wilderness survival. There were no clear wins here. She watched the man who had hurt her deteriorate physically and cognitively until he died in 1985, with Sue present at the end. She was 22 years old, but his being gone didn't bring her any relief. Sue was left with debt, responsibility, and the realization that the life she had tried to build had nearly destroyed her. She sold what little they owned, gathered a small amount of cash, and made a decision that outsiders often misinterpret. She didn't return to society for support. She went back to the wild. Instead of seeking proximity to people, Sue sought distance from systems that stripped autonomy. That trade made sense to her, and it explains why, later in life, she would tolerate physical danger longer than emotional coercion, and why betrayal by institutions, not animals, would ultimately provoke her strongest response. By the time Sue returned to Alaska permanently, she wasn't chasing freedom. She was choosing an environment where survival depended on honesty, not promises, control, or silence. That choice would define everything that followed. The Kavik River. When Sue Aikens first took over what would become Kavik River Camp, it was barely functional. The site was an abandoned oil support camp north of the Arctic Circle, littered with debris, rotting structures, fuel waste, and wildlife drawn in by years of human neglect. Bears roamed freely through the ruins. Nothing about the place suggested it could be turned into a viable operation. Sue stayed anyway. She rebuilt Kavik incrementally and alone. Structures were torn down by hand and replaced with cabins. She hauled materials for herself. Fuel systems were repaired. Storage was redesigned to keep wildlife out. Runways were maintained so planes could land safely in extreme conditions. Every improvement came with the risk of frostbite, infection, exhaustion, and mechanical failure. Fires destroyed buildings. Floods wiped out supplies. Each time, she rebuilt without waiting for help that might never come. This was Sue's passion project and her way to reclaim control. At Kavik, Sue determined the rules. Access was regulated. Guests were vetted. Supplies were tracked. Wildlife encounters were managed on her terms. After years of living under unstable authority, Kavik represented something rare in her life, an environment where she could eliminate unpredictability through preparation. But that didn't mean life here was very safe. Bear encounters were frequent and serious. Bears charged her on multiple occasions during cleanup and construction. She learned their behavior patterns, deterrence limits, and warning signs through direct exposure. Fires forced her to redesign structures with better spacing and materials. Flooding taught her where not to build and how to store essentials above the waterline. Each setback allowed her to come back stronger. The bear that ended everything. On July 10, 2007, though, her systems failed. While working outside the camp, Sue set her rifle down briefly. A routine action she had done countless times. A grizzly bear charged from close range with no warning. She had seconds to react. The bear knocked her unconscious, dragged her, and mauled her for an extended period. She sustained severe injuries, crushed bones, extensive bite wounds, scalp damage, and massive blood loss. She survived by applying tactics she had learned from indigenous elders, playing dead once resistance failed, minimizing movement, and using bodily signals to convince the animal she was no longer a threat. After the bear left, Sue regained consciousness and assessed her injuries alone. There was no immediate rescue. She crawled to her rifle, fired shots to signal distress, and then treated herself. She cleaned wounds, stitched her scalp with fishing line, stabilized injuries with improvised splints, and continued operating the camp for days while severely injured. Guests came and went without realizing how close their host had been to death. The long-term consequences were significant. Physically, Sue endured chronic pain, nerve damage, and lasting mobility issues. Psychologically, the attack changed her risk tolerance. She fortified Kavik with bear-proof fencing and adjusted daily protocols. Sleep became lighter, and weapons were kept closer. But the bear didn't push her away from the wilderness. It only helped her fix the oversights that led to it. And that tells you all you need to know about Sue's survival mindset. The cost of fame. When Sue Aikens was approached by producers connected to Life Below Zero, the pitch was simple. Document real life in the Arctic with no scripts, stunts, or manufactured danger. For Sue, that condition wasn't negotiable. She wasn't interested in playing survival when survival was her actual job. Early filming reflected that agreement. Long, uneventful days. Maintenance, logistics, weather preparation. Viewers saw generators fail, pipes freeze, and planes delayed. It wasn't flashy, but it was real and unexpectedly compelling. Ratings grew because audiences recognized authenticity. Tension surfaced when producers began pushing for more dramatic beats. They wanted predators, urgency, near misses. Sue resisted. She refused to provoke wildlife or exaggerate risk. Her stance was straightforward. Unnecessary danger wasn't brave. It was stupid, and she had learned that through experience. But the producers didn't see it that way, and they certainly didn't respect her expertise. From that point on, the relationship shifted, and they certainly didn't respect her expertise. From that point on, the relationship shifted. The breaking point came during a winter shoot, involving a snow machine crossing overflow ice, a known hazard where water sits above frozen river surfaces. Sue warned that the area was unsafe, but one of the producers insisted that they go on as planned. The pressure wasn't subtle here. Contracts gave production authority over activities, and refusal could mean breach. Sue complied once. The snow machine hit unstable ice, and Sue crashed at high speed. The impact shattered her collarbone in multiple places, tore soft tissue, and caused severe frostbite. She was injured and exposed in sub-zero conditions. What followed mattered more than the crash itself. Evacuation was delayed. Instead of an immediate airlift, filming continued, and she was asked to walk for footage. Cameras stayed on while she bled and deteriorated. Only hours later was transported for medical care, first by snow machine, then eventually by plane. But the world was only sold the story of Sue's bravery instead of the huge negligence on the production's part. In 2017, Sue filed a lawsuit against BBC Worldwide and National Geographic. She sought damages for negligence, breach of contract, and reckless endangerment. Medical records detailed titanium plates, screws, nerve damage, and permanent impairment. During the dispute, one word surfaced that reframed everything: expendable. According to Sue, executives described her that way internally, someone replaceable if injured or killed. That revelation spread quickly. Fans reacted with outrage. Petitions circulated. Online forums threatened boycotts. Nearly a third of the audience signaled they would stop watching if the show continued business as usual. While the case was settled privately in 2018, the damage to the show's credibility was public and lasting because Sue was barred from appearing for multiple seasons. Silence clauses followed, but the world already knew what was happening. Speaking out came with obvious consequences. Sue lost income during her absence from the show. Medical expenses mounted. Chronic pain became routine. Multiple surgeries followed, including reconstructive work and ongoing treatment for nerve damage and mobility loss. She returned to the series later, but the relationship was altered, and so was the illusion the producers had tried to sell. Beyond personal cost, Sue redirected her anger into advocacy. She testified before lawmakers, pushing for safety standards in extreme environment reality television. Her argument was simple: consent under coercive contracts isn't consent. Expertise shouldn't nullify basic protections. Her case became a reference point for other cast members across the industry who had been injured but stayed silent. Some of those protections were later written into new production guidelines. The irony wasn't lost on her. Alaska hadn't broken her body. Television almost did. It feels like life just never gave Sue a break, because soon after she was done with the lawsuit and its fallout, the loss compounded. She lost close family members, including her granddaughter, a blow that temporarily halted production. Her mother's death followed not long after. Private grief became unavoidable, even with cameras present. Physically, decades of labor caught up. Her spine showed damage consistent with repeated trauma. In her 60s, she underwent major spinal fusion surgery. 3 vertebrae were permanently stabilized. Recovery was long, and even then the pain didn't disappear. Slowly, Sue began acknowledging the limits of her body, but it didn't come at the cost of her autonomy. She knew that her life still had a purpose, and she wanted to keep pursuing it. She partnered with other survival experts to transform Kavik into a structured wilderness school. Courses focused on predator awareness, emergency response, and decision-making under stress. Enrollment filled quickly. Demand proved something important. People didn't just want to watch survival anymore. They wanted to understand it. Sue moved from being the subject of survival to its custodian. She mentored younger instructors, shared hard-earned mistakes, documented what cameras never showed. Her work became educational rather than performative, and that's the legacy that she has created for herself. Far away from the spectacle of reality TV, a legacy that she is truly proud of. In the end, Sue Aikens survived everything: an unstable life, the wilderness, the industry that was determined to break her. What do you think of her incredible journey? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching.